Hi, welcome to our next ParentIN presentation. We've been hearing from a lot of families and educators in our area about increasing concerns around youth vaping. And we wanted to provide this event as an opportunity to connect both youth and families to more information about vaping, about the consequences of use, and how to help your kids make healthy choices. We've also included a lot of good information about resources and support. So hopefully we'll have a chance to learn together and to connect folks to support in our area and to ask questions. Please do reach out to us at any point after this if there's things that didn't get answered today or that you need additional resources. ParentIN is always here to support our community. We work primarily in the Burlington and Champlain Valley School District areas, but we're here as a support for families in our area. So please do reach out anytime. My name is Mariah Flynn. I am the director of the Burlington Partnership for a Healthy Community, which is a substance misuse prevention coalition that serves Burlington. And right now I'm coordinating the ParentIN efforts in Burlington. We also have a ParentIN coordinator, Amy Sayer, who works in the Champlain Valley Union School District. So between the two of us, we're here to support families and trying to connect you to more information and resources. Please do reach out through ParentIN. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what are vaping products, talk about the epidemic of vaping and why we're concerned, learn a little bit about what's happening and why we got here, what are the risks for youth that are different than they might be for adults, and how to talk to kids about it and get them help when they need it. We'll try to go through a lot of information. So, but I'm only going to briefly touch on each of those subjects. So again, there's lots more information out there. I hope you'll continue to keep learning. What's happened for our generation for folks who are parenting adolescents now, what's happened for this generation is that they really are the guinea pigs of this product, of vaping products. They're still relatively new. So a Chinese pharmacist and heavy smoker, Han Lik, developed the first commercially successful e-cigarette about 20 years ago. And it got onto the market not too long after. Because they're only really about 20 years old, they're still relatively new. There's a lot that we don't know about what the long-term impacts of use are going to be. For instance, one of the things to think about is that just in 2019, only a few years ago, there was a dramatic rise in vaping-associated lung illness, which is now called EVALI. With youth and young adults suffering really severe health consequences from vaping, even death. And it was determined that that was most likely related to harmful contaminants in vape devices with THC. There were over 3,000 cases reported in all 50 states. And so the CDC issued a statement at that time advising that e-cigarette vaping products should never be used by youth, young adults, or women who are pregnant. They also said that adults who do not currently use tobacco products should not start using e-cigarettes or vaping products, and that there's no safe tobacco products. So all tobacco products, including e-cigarettes, carry a risk, and that advisory that they issued is still kind of in effect today. Those points are still ones that are made around whether this product, who this product is safe for, and not. But I think that situation that happened just a few years ago begs the question for all of us is, what other risks might there be? Can things like this continue to happen? Because there's so very little that we know about the long-term effects of vaping devices. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've learned so far in the rest of this presentation. But to be clear, when we say like we don't know what the risk is, that doesn't mean there's no risk. It just means we're still learning. And unfortunately, this generation of kids are going to be the guinea pigs until we learn and know more and can do better as a society for them. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about what is an electronic nicotine delivery system or a vape device. So basically, there's a couple of main components that almost all of them have in them. There's a cartridge that either contains nicotine or a THC solution, a heating element that aerosols the solution, and then a power source for that heating element, usually a rechargeable lithium battery. E-cigarettes have that battery, they have that heating, an atomizer with a heating coil, and then an absorbent material that absorbs a liquid that can contain the nicotine. And it's similar if you're going to put THC liquids into there. And then usually there's also other chemicals and some flavoring. The battery heats up the liquid, which has been more recently referred to as e-juice, and that creates an aerosol that is then breathed into the lungs and then breathed out into the air repeatedly. Some of the devices are preloaded with that e-juice, and others you buy separately and you add it yourself. The original e-cigarettes, when they were first developed, looked kind of like this picture that you see on the screen. They came preloaded with all everything inside, and then they were disposable. But the main thing to kind of think about is that, like I just mentioned, there's a lot of things that you're breathing in that are harmful to the lungs, and it's not, I think there was a myth for a while going around that e-cigarettes and vape devices were just releasing harmless water vapor. About 10 years ago, or between 5 to 10 years ago, when this started to become more popular with youth, we would hear in the work that I was doing, youth say that they thought that it was just like a flavored vapor that they were inhaling. They didn't realize that there was anything else in there, like nicotine or other chemicals. I think we've all learned a lot since then about what is in these devices, and that it's not just harmless water vapor. The important thing for us to kind of know and kind of reiterate for youth is that myth that there is an aerosol that's coming from the vape device. It's not just water vapor, and it contains substances that are harmful to the lungs and the body. None of these things that you see on the screen that are in the vapor that is inhaled into the lungs have been, the lungs have not evolved to handle any of those substances. So our lungs want to breathe in oxygen, and that's just about it. So anything else really can be an irritant to the lungs and cause even in short-term and long-term impacts. Things that you'll also see sometimes is happening when folks are regularly using vaping devices is exposure to metals in the lungs. So parts of the e-cigarette or the vape device, that part that includes the metallic coil and the joints and the wires can erode and get into the aerosol that you breathe into your lungs that can cause some serious health impacts. So other things, all of these ingredients have been found in vaping devices, things that you find in antifreeze or nail polish remover, and paints and pesticides. So I just want to kind of keep reiterating that the things that are in here are, one, just in general, not healthy for the body, but in particular are really hard on the lungs and the part of your body that's trying to help you breathe and survive. But the place where we're seeing the most concerning trends for youth is in this ingredient that's in the vape devices, the flavoring or the e-juice. At this point, the research I could find there said that there was more than 8,000 different flavors of e-juice, but that was based on just a few years ago. So I think at this point, we're probably even past that number. E-juice is the slang term for the liquid in an e-cigarette. It's or a vaping device. E-liquid is kind of the more formal name, but you'll hear folks who vape usually refer to it as e-juice. More often than not, it includes nicotine. Or now that we've legalized cannabis in our state, you might also see more perforation of e-juice with THC. So nicotine is a toxic, colorless, yellowish, oily liquid. It's the chief active component of tobacco. It acts as a stimulant in really small doses, but in larger amounts, it blocks the action of nerve and muscle cells. So the important thing to also know about nicotine is that it can be absorbed through the skin. So what some folks have found when handling vape devices is that there can be kind of a nicotine poisoning through the skin because some of those liquids have escaped from the device and are getting on hands and fingers. But the most important thing to think about from this is that it seems to be the flavoring that is attracting youth to this product, right? The use of flavors mask the harshness of the tobacco. And it's been really a deceptive marketing tactic that's been used by the tobacco industry for decades. It's flavorings included in the majority of their products, including even menthol cigarettes and fruit-flavored cigars. The vapor lacks the harsh, when it's in an e-cigarette, the vapor lacks the harsh burn of traditional cigarettes or cigars. So with the flavoring and the lack of that harsh burn, that first puff that the young person might take is much friendlier on the palate. And it's a lot easier for youth to take up the habit, to not be initially dissuaded and to continue using because they're not having those negative impacts that you might have from a traditional cigarette. The other thing to note is that beyond nicotine, any substance that can be transformed into a liquid can be used in an e-cigarette. But again, similarly, there's none of these things. Our own body has not yet evolved to be able to handle breathing in any of the flavorings or the additives that have been added to these products. I also wanted to note, we're going to talk a little bit about language. We're going to use different types of language as I'm talking through this presentation, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page around the language that we'll use. So I will most often use the word cannabis, and that refers to, traditionally that word refers to all parts or products derived from the cannabis plant. You'll also hear folks use the word marijuana, and that generally in the past refers to parts or product of the plant, usually the leaves and flowers that contain most of the THC or the tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the psychoactive component of a plant that makes people intoxicated. But more recently, the word marijuana is often being replaced with cannabis with THC, or the use of cannabis because there's a racially charged history connected to use of the word marijuana. Here in our state, in Vermont, the legislature actually mandated that the word marijuana be changed to cannabis in all of our laws. So for that purpose, when we're using it, talking in Vermont, cannabis refers to the drug, usually anything that contains more than 0.3% THC. Less than that is considered, less than 0.3% THC is considered hemp. And I say that because it's important to note that depending on where in the country you are, different languages being used to mean the same thing, and that can get confusing. It can be confusing for kids, it can be confusing for us. So when we're talking in Vermont, we're going to talk about cannabis. But the other thing to note is that in some of the slides moving forward, you'll see the use of the word marijuana, particularly when we're talking about surveys that students have taken, because in the survey, that is the word that was used for students. And so I want to reflect the data correctly. But in general, we'll change to either use cannabis or cannabis with THC to avoid connecting language to that racially charged history. I also want to note that the cannabinoid receptors, the places where the THC attaches to, are concentrated in areas of the brain that are associated with thinking and memory and coordination and time perception. So, so THC, when young people inhale it or take it into the body in whatever way they're ingesting it, it attaches to those receptors and activates them. And that's why you see impacts on a variety of different things in the body. So you'll see impacts sometimes on a person's memory, also on pleasure, on their ability to move, on thinking and concentration and coordination and time perception, like I said. So, so we'll talk a little bit more about impacts moving forward, but I just wanted to mention a little bit about cannabis for folks who might be new to what the impacts of that are. So here in our state, you can see that we have been seeing some trends. And one of the reasons why we're talking about vaping today is that more than 1/4 of Vermont high school students, in the last time that we surveyed them, reported that they were using marijuana in the last 30 days. And we're seeing a drastic increase in the number of youth who are reporting that they're using electronic vapor products. This is the survey. This is from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data that our state participates in every 2 years. Unfortunately, the kids did take this survey in 2021 and in 2023, but we still don't have the 2021 data back yet. We have been doing some similar data collection in Burlington, and we're seeing there was kind of a dip during the pandemic, which impacted a lot of risky behaviors that students were engaging in, but we're seeing that self-reports or reports from schools and parents and youth are that there was a dip during the pandemic, and then more recently we're seeing an increase again in vapor product use in our area. I also want to note that cannabis use disorder in our state, cannabis use disorder is the #1 reason that youth in our state in Vermont go into substance use treatment. So these two substances that are being put into vaping devices, there seems to be a connection with the rise in substance use in those two areas, whereas we're seeing drops in substance use in some other in other areas around alcohol and cigarette use, as you can see in the slide. So the chart on the screen is from the National Youth Tobacco Survey, which is administered by the CDC every year. And you can see that there's been a steady increase in youth cigarette use from 2017 to 2019. Youth e-cigarette use, I'm sorry, this is e-cigarette use data. So during that 3-year span of between 2017 to 2019, there was a 135% increase among high school students and then a 218% increase among middle school students. That story shifted during the pandemic. Like I said, data, you see this like huge drop, but what we're expecting because of some of the data that we have been collecting more recently is that you'll see a drastic increase again. So there was something that was happening during the pandemic where kids were less exposed to each other, and that decreased substance use rates. But unfortunately, all of the other impacts of the pandemic seem to have exacerbated some of the challenges kids were experiencing, and we'll talk a little bit about other things that were happening in the industry that has pushed those numbers to rise again. But I wanted you to note that the national data is matching our local data. The other thing to pay attention to is that here in our state, we seem to really be struggling with cannabis or marijuana use in a way that is that we have had problems for a while, in that we have the highest rates of marijuana use among people 12 and up in the nation, and that's been consistent for a few years now, or for quite a few years now. So this was an issue that we were experiencing over the last decade, and kind of recent accessibility between legalization and the industry kind of targeting of vaping products, the combination of those two is something to be concerned at, because our substance use rates are already pretty high compared to the rest of the nation. And also, just to kind of bring it a little more locally, we've been doing some surveying of folks, like I said, to help us to better understand what's happening, because we're still waiting for some of this national and larger data from students. And so we heard from parents that that they are that their kids are struggling with vaping use, and they did not normally. It was not something that they ever thought that would have impacted their kids. A lot of staff at the schools are saying that that's what they're seeing mostly, is this vaping and use of edibles in addition. So I think it's important to pay attention to these things that we're hearing, to respond, and to make sure that both we and our kids have access to good information so we can make healthy choices around these things. So let's talk a little bit about what vape products are and where we are now. So as you may remember from before, I was talking about this kind of first generation of e-cigarette, where they were, they kind of had the look of traditional cigarettes. They were intended to be used until the liquid ran out. They came kind of preloaded with all of what you needed inside, and then they were meant to be discarded. And then there was the second generation here where the vape pens started to grow in size a little bit, so you could put more in there. And they also had a small refillable tank and a battery that could be recharged. This kind of helps with continued use, right? Like there's an ease that's added to that product. And then you see in the third generation, there's a much larger rechargeable battery, or a large rechargeable battery, and then a large refillable cartridge. Those were also called mods because you could break them open and modify some of the parts. So you would find, this is where we would hear that youth or others were kind of breaking them apart and starting to put cannabis liquid, cannabis infused liquid into them in addition to the nicotine infused liquid. So, and then in the fourth generation, you'll see a picture here on the two that are listed, one that kind of looks like a USB port, and that is the Juul. Juul came out with this sleek kind of high-tech design with easily rechargeable batteries that entered the market. They became the most popular e-cigarette device, particularly used by youth, and I think was some of the driving force behind the epidemic that we see among young people using now. They use small disposable pods that contained e-liquid, and then they were inserted into that larger Juul device. They could even be that, like, battery could be recharged in a laptop or a computer. They became so popular that they even spawned their own terminology. So instead of being called vaping, it was often called juuling. And so it was a way, I think, for youth to not even associate themselves with vaping or being someone who used nicotine. They're just a jeweler. They just jeweled. Juul also pioneered the use of nicotine salts, which allows the nicotine, again, to be inhaled even more easily into the body. So you could have much higher nicotine content that went into the body than traditional cigarettes or even the vaping devices that came before. And then this fifth generation is even a new sleek design that's where we're seeing even more types of flavorings and a much higher nicotine concentration that kind of continue to learn from the products of the past and make it more and more accessible and potent. And we know that those two things combined makes it much more likely for someone to develop a nicotine addiction or a substance use addiction when things are easily accessible and where potency is high and the potential for developing a problem happens much quicker. So here on the screen, you'll see some kind of common household products and then also some vaping devices. So I'll give everyone a second to try to identify which ones are the vaping devices. And you can see here, the ones that I've circled on the screen are the vape devices. But just as I noted before, there was a intention, I believe, by the industry to make products that looked like common household items. We'll talk a little bit more about that and why. Let's see if we can do it again. So here on the screen, you'll see a combination of tobacco products and also some common school products or household items. And here you can see the ones that are, I put arrows next to the ones that are tobacco products. And so this is a trend in the tobacco industry, and the cannabis industry is matching up with it to create products that mirror things that youth already like or use regularly, or that we as adults do the same with. And we saw that this was seemed to be a way for youth to hide early substance use of vapes in the beginning. So there was a concern that the industry made products where they were trying to get folks to start using early, because the earlier someone uses, the more likely they are to develop a problem. And problem use is where industries like the tobacco, cannabis, and alcohol industry make their most of their money. So it's in their financial interest to get people using early and often, because that will help create the lifetime users that they need to make money in the industry. So you can see that where we are in our in this epidemic that we're seeing among youth vaping is a habit that has been or that the industry has used for a long time. You'll see that the vaping products that are available and on the market now are just the same corporations that produce traditional cigarettes. Reynolds or RJ Reynolds, you might be more familiar with them. They are the company that sells Newport cigarettes. They also sell blue vaping products. Altria, which is the former Philip Morris, sells Mark 10. And they also just purchased one of the most popular vape brands called Enjoy. Imperial Tobacco is the company that sells Camel, and they sell Booze, the vaping product. So one of the things that Philip Morris said years ago was that it's important to know as much as possible about the teenage smoking patterns and attitudes, because today's teenager is tomorrow's potential regular customer. And that is still, whether they say it out loud anymore, it's still, I think, the philosophy of industries like this. Like I said, in order to develop someone who uses a substance frequently, they need to get people using early. Of the people who so if someone doesn't start using tobacco until after the age of 25. The likelihood that they'll ever start is only 1%. So most people start using before the age of 25, and the industry needs to get them using early in order to make a profit. So the vapes are really just the tobacco industry reimagined for this generation. They needed a product that appealed to this generation of users, so they made something that was electronic, that was flashy, and that had kind of cool flavors and fun designs. What you're also seeing is that there's an important connection between vaping, nicotine, and cannabis. Altria, like I said, is formerly Philip Morris. They just recently spent $1.8 billion in December of 2018 for a 45% stake in Cronos Group, which is one of the first major multinational cannabis firms that's based in Canada. And you're seeing that throughout. That's just one example of other places where the cannabis industry and the tobacco industry are merging. So this is one of the reasons we think that there seems to be a connection between students who are vaping nicotine vapes and cannabis vapes, that young people are transitioning from one to the other. Additionally, kids are much more influenced by advertising than adults are. And so a lot of the advertising that was happening, and one of the reasons Juul got sued in recent years, is that they were really marketing and trying to appeal to very young people, like I said. We saw that exposure to advertising seems to be connected to kids having more favorable attitudes, both about cannabis and about nicotine. And so one of the things we'll talk a little bit more about, but is to think about as a parent, is what is your kid being exposed to, and how do you talk to them about it, about being media savvy and thinking about what's coming across their feed or what they're walking by on their way to school. Those things are important, and they're influencing the way young people are thinking about these products. You're also seeing, so you see on the screen some of the examples of kind of products that were really seem to be more appealing to young people. And you can see that companies really trying to appeal to the things that appeal to young people, right? They're trying to make vaping devices more fashionable. Many companies have created accessories for vape devices, things like easily attaching it to your phone case. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner charms that you can add. There's cases that you can add to your vape device. There's clothing that you can buy to conceal your vape device. There's clothing that's been made with like stealth pockets, and you can see a picture here of a pullover hoodie that has kind of a discrete location for your vape device, so that you can use it without a lot of attention. But you can see also that just in general, the companies thought about what is it that kids like. They like having accessories. They like technology, and so matching up the product with technology that kids enjoy. And then they like kind of personalizing things, so finding ways to personalize the device as well. They're capitalizing on the things that they know young people like. We also saw, this slide just shows that this is from 2020 data, which actually, I'm sorry, 2019 data. And what we saw then, like I said, was that early on, teens thought that what was in these devices was just flavoring. They didn't realize that there was nicotine or marijuana in it. And what we're finding now is that that has changed in the last couple of years. We have done a good job, I think, of educating a lot of youth about this, but early on, especially students who are exposed to this in middle school, that might be what they're hearing. They might be hearing that this device just has flavoring, it's just strawberry flavored air, or water vapor. So making sure that we're talking to kids about that it's not just flavoring, that anything that's put into these devices, the lung has not been developed to be exposed to or to handle, and that we want to avoid putting those kind of aerosols into our lungs. So here's a survey that was done at the University of Texas, asking kids about why they vape. And this was like asking them early on about what are some of the reasons why they started or why they vape. So in the beginning, I think most people would said that it was to experiment, to see what it was like. And then other folks are also noting because it tastes good, because it's part of a social situation, to have a good time with friends, or tied to kind of relaxation and relieving tension. One thing that's also important to note is that these same questions were asked in 2018, and the students who reported that they were using to relax or relieve tension increased by more than a third compared to the 2018 results. So there's more students who are saying that that's why they're using vaping now as a kind of emotional response. So it's important for us to be thinking about that. Another reason that kids don't always realize maybe when they're reporting on these things as to why they vape, but we know contributes to it, is marketing. So there has been really pervasive marketing and advertising of vape products. According to the 2019 National Youth Tobacco Survey, 7 in 10 kids are regularly exposed to e-cigarette advertising. So like I said, only 1% of people in the US start using tobacco for the first time after the age of 26. So these industries really need to get people started young if they're going to make a profit. So we as adults can help teach kids to recognize vaping ads, which can often be really stealthy and subtle in social media. So we can help kids understand when they're being sold something, when it's advertising for a product. Particularly that happens in media influencing, right? Where influencers on social media, where there's it may not look like a traditional advertisement that students might be used to seeing on like YouTube or television, but it might be someone that they follow for other reasons, also promoting a product. So for us to be able to know what they're viewing and then talk to them about why these people are promoting these products, that they're being paid to do that, and that it's and have conversations about the potential harms. So there are reasons why addressing youth vaping is more important, while we're focusing so much on youth, in contrast to maybe adults who might be using. And one of those reasons is that 9 out of 10 people with substance use problems started using by the age 18. So basically, the earlier youth initiate use of any substance, it really doesn't matter whether it's alcohol, cannabis, tobacco, the more likely they initiate any use of a substance, the more likely they are to develop a problem use or dependence on a substance. There's also evidence that suggests that e-cigarette use increases someone's chance of using combustible cigarettes. So what's happening sometimes is that adolescents and young people are starting with e-cigarettes, but then moving to combustible cigarettes, to traditional cigarettes, as they are a young adult, in their young adult years, because it's cheaper and easier for them to sustain their nicotine addiction. So really what's happening is that e-cigarettes are the mechanism that is creating a new generation of folks that are addicted to nicotine. I'll note, like I said earlier, that this is not specific to nicotine addiction or cannabis addiction. It's really just the brain has not yet developed, and when the brain has not yet developed, it makes it more susceptible to developing a substance use disorder. And so delaying use is really a key strategy to helping our kids grow up without developing substance use issues. For example, 40% of people who begin drinking at age 15 are likely to develop an alcohol use disorder, whereas only 7% of those who start drinking at 21 develop an alcohol use disorder. So the thing that happens, you may have heard this, and I think that I've heard this research kind of promoted a lot in recent years, that the human brain is still developing during adolescence, and that it does not fully mature until probably about 25 years old. It's usually a little bit earlier for people who are born with the biological sex of female, and then for folks who are born biologically male, it might take up to the age of 25. But the reality is that because the brain's still developing, the longer you can delay substance use, the less likely it is to have an impact on how students develop, and the less likely it is to influence their future choices. So what's happening is that during adolescence, you'll see when kids are younger, there's all this activity happening in their brain. So all that yellow and green and red that you see in the pictures of the young 5-year-old and the preteen is all the activity, all these neural pathways that are connections that are being made, and developing that's happening in the purple. You can see like the connections that have already been made. And so there's all this activity happening during those years. And then in the teen years, there's what happens is what's called a pruning. So the brain and individuals are kind of reinforcing some of the pathways in their brain that they really enjoy, or that they do things that they do a lot. And the brain is kind of pruning away some of the things that it's not going to be using as much. And so whatever the student is doing a lot of in those years really gets reinforced, and the pathways that they're not using get pared down. So I like to think of this as whatever the brain does a lot of, the brain gets good at. And if what your student is doing a lot of during those adolescent years is substance use, or is reinforcing things like, I'm dealing with anxiety and stress, and so I'm going to use a vape product to handle that anxiety. So they're reinforcing this use of a substance to manage the stress and anxiety. And that's what kind of connection is being made in their brain. So what we want to be doing during those years is helping them to reinforce pathways towards healthy behaviors, and to connect them to lots of experiences that help with them develop strategies to manage stress and anxiety in different ways. Oh, you can see I actually was talking about this slide without having it on the screen, so I'll leave it here for a minute so you can take a look. Here's the 20-year-old brain that's fully or almost at the age of fully developed, where all of the beautiful purple and blue shows that all those connections have been made and strengthened in the brain. So just to reinforce kind of some of the things I've been saying along the way, nicotine and THC are addictive and they're harmful to the teen brain. And right here on the screen, we've just listed what we know from research that shows statistical correlation or association between cannabis use and a variety of other behaviors. So things like impairment to learning and memory and attention. There's a connection between cannabis use and worse respiratory symptoms. Also, what we're seeing a lot in young people is an increase in mental health related issues. So if you're using, particularly when you're using heavily during adolescence, there's much more likely to develop schizophrenia or other psychosis, depressive disorders, suicidal ideation, social anxiety disorder. Like I said before, there's much higher risk of cannabis use disorder and an increased risk to develop problem use of other substances if you're using cannabis during adolescence. And then there's also similarly associations between nicotine use and other issues that we probably don't want for our youth. So things like impairment to attention and learning. Nicotine hacks into circuits in the teen brain differently than it does for adults. So it makes it harder for them to quit nicotine products once they're dependent. And like I said earlier, makes them more likely to develop that dependence on nicotine and to move on to smoking traditional cigarettes. There's also impacts on the lung and heart, increased risk of substance use disorder for other things. And then we've also seen some connection between folks who are using nicotine and contracting COVID or other respiratory illnesses because of the impairment and the impact on the lungs. You also, you might have heard things like folks have a harder time getting over colds. It seems to impact their ability to do well long-term in sports because of the impairment on the lungs. For folks who have asthma, there's even more flare-ups for asthmatic flare-ups. So things to be aware of and thinking about, particularly for youth, that there's a lot of health-related issues that we see in some of the same ways in adults, but not to the same extent. And then I also just wanted to note, because I think this is something that parents really think a lot about, is the risk to academic and career potential. Particularly with cannabis, there seems to be an impact that you don't necessarily see with other substances that are popular among young people. So alcohol, nicotine, and cannabis are the three substances where, like I said, young people usually start. They tend to be we see the highest rates of substance use among young people for those three substances. But use of cannabis weekly is related to risks to academic and career potential that we don't necessarily see with alcohol. So you'll see that folks who are using cannabis weekly has lower rates of completing high school, lower rates of enrolling in a university, and less likely to obtain a secondary degree or a degree. So, so it's just something to be thinking about as you're talking to your student, what the risks are to other goals that they might have long-term for themselves that they want to accomplish if they're using while they're young. So let's talk quickly about how might I know if my own child might be vaping. It's hard when you have a teenager because there's so many things that their body and brain is going through that some things that might be concerning are just normal adolescent development. But you know your own kids. And so you probably know if something seems off. So if you're seeing a lot of behavioral changes, seeing more irritability, anxiety, more mood swings, a lot of lack of impulse control, that can be related to use of vaping. Some of that might be that they're kind of going through withdrawal throughout the day when their body is craving the nicotine or the THC. if your student is normally really calm and very easygoing, but now they seem really anxious and irritable and not have a lot of patience, that's something to be thinking about. If there's changes in eating patterns, if they're having a lot of struggling in school, some just kind of very more clear signs are things like mouth sores and dry mouth, if they're having a lot of unexplained nosebleeds. And then things that might be connected are a lot of missing phone chargers and sudden interest in having a lot of perfumes and smells going in their room or around them, to help to help hide the smells that come from vaping the flavoring. So these are, tricky because they're often things that happen outside of there being a problem. So I guess I would say these are just a path to start a conversation with your child, that we want to be continuing to look for signs that our kids are struggling, and to address it and support them early, because who, if not their parents or their caregivers, the folks who love them most, are going to be the ones to come to them. So if you're in a place where you think you need to start a conversation about this, we suggest creating the right environment for an open dialogue. Make sure everyone's in a calm place, looking for good opportunities to start a conversation. That's not starting with those like scary words like we need to talk. No one wants to hear that. Their immediate thought is, what did I do wrong, right? So look for places where you can jump on an opportunity, maybe a news story or an event that's come up. Maybe there was something that happened in your own community that you can ask them about. Try to keep judgment out of it, and use open-ended questions as much as possible because they invite conversation versus one-word answers, right? Where if you think about the question and you know that they could answer it yes or no, then try to frame it differently so that you can get to more detailed to a more detailed conversation, a nuanced conversation. And lots of simple conversations rather than one big sit down talk. The more we can talk about it and keep bringing it up in the right environment, the better. Sometimes you might start this conversation and it doesn't go well the first time, and that's okay. Try again. You can come back to them and say, hey, I'm sorry, that didn't go the way I was hoping last time. Can we talk about this again? I really love to know your thoughts about X. The other thing I would suggest is, ask for support from the folks in the community who they also trust, other trusted adults, their healthcare provider. This doesn't have to be just you having these conversations with them. So some things to get you started. Ask them about their future goals and how substance use get in the way with them. Encourage, I cannot stress this enough, encourage skepticism of the industry. Talk about the things that we shared in this presentation today about the vaping industry's financial interests to get people using early and often and create the lifelong users. Look at ads together, talk about what they're trying to sell. Talk to them about the facts, but if you can't remember them from today, invite them to just like learn with you. Go online and both of you will learn so that you can answer your questions together. Help them practice how they'll respond when offered vapes or another substance. And then be clear about what your consequences will be or your expectations are. Be clear about what your expectations are and then what your consequences will be if they don't meet them, and then follow through. To go back to this idea of like helping them practice, you don't want the first time your child is offered a substance or a vape device to be the first time they've thought about what they'll do. So give them the opportunity to think about it ahead of time. For all of us, saying no is really hard. Saying yes is really easy. And so we all often tend to say yes, maybe more than we mean to or want to, because no feels like it comes with an explanation, needs to come with an explanation. So help them practice whether they want to give an explanation or not. They don't have to, they can just say no thanks. But if they feel like they need one, help them practice what those things are and what and how you can be a support for them in those moments. And then I put here on the screen a few like open-ended questions you could try. Asking a question like, what are you noticing that's happening at school with vaping? What do you think about that? If you know your student is already vaping, find out a little bit more about why. How does vaping make you feel? What do you enjoy about it? That'll help you think about how do you move them to something else that helps them get those same feelings in a different way that's healthier for them. So I've put here on the screen a few talking points. I'm not going to go through them all now, but you can come back to them later if you need to in this recording. We'll also send out an email with places to look for more information. It is natural for kids to feel curious and have questions about substance use. And we're all learning about this together. These are new products. They're being promoted really widely, and there's still lots that we're learning. So together, kind of use it as an experience for you both to learn together. The one thing I would want to note also is that most Vermont teens are still not using. So that's something to let kids know about, that it might seem that there's a lot of students that are vaping now, but most students are still not. So it's okay to be one of those students that's not, and to know that there's other folks along with them in that situation. So what if you know that they have a problem? We're going to skip through this just in the interest of time. So what if you know that they have a problem? Or that, so first you're seeing these signs of nicotine addiction. You're seeing the irritability, the restlessness, the headaches. They're feeling tired. They're having difficulty concentrating. They're having difficulty sleeping. They're having intense cravings to use. These are signs that that their body is already addicted to nicotine. What's happening, unfortunately, is that they might associate the vaping with very positive feelings, right? There's these triggers that happen when you're getting a craving, and when they use the nicotine or the cannabis, what's happening is that they're associating the feelings of feeling better after using with that product. But what's actually happening when they're starting to feel anxious or uncomfortable is that they're going through withdrawal, right? And so they're using the vape device to help them manage the effects of the withdrawal. So if you start to reframe it that way, is really what's happening is your body's going through withdrawal, you're getting the nicotine or the cannabis, and then your body feels better, but it's part of the cycle of dependence that's happening, that's making you feel better, not necessarily the fact that this product is really great at managing anxiety, right? Because what's happening actually is one of the reasons you're feeling anxious is that your body is in withdrawal from the product. So starting to look for other ways to manage that craving or those anxiety feelings to get them through. And I cannot stress enough that it's really helpful for kids or for any of us that are trying to cut back on something that we know is unhealthy for us, to get additional help. So your child's pediatrician is a great resource. Your school might have a student assistance program counselor or an SAP that can help them in school. And then there's licensed drug and alcohol counselors that can help them outside of school. Some schools offer them in school, but there's also wonderful programs in our community that can help your kid outside of school. And then we have free resources for tobacco cessation in our state. So My Life, My Quit is a text-based program for youth. If you go to mylifemyquit.org, kids can learn about how to text a number to get text support, individualized text support to help them with their quit journey. And then 802 Quits is the program we have for adults in our state. It offers free tips, tools, nicotine replacement therapy. So there's so many great resources in our community to help people who are ready to quit using. And I do recommend that your doctor is a great way to support that journey and can help with nicotine replacement if that's something that your child needs. So important reminders is that this is not just on you. As parents, we often blame ourselves for poor and unhealthy choices our kids make. And I want to make sure that I'm really clear that where we are right now as a society around vaping has a lot less to do with our individual parenting choices and a lot more to do with a predatory industry targeting these products at young people. That there was this push to normalize this use of this substance, to make it more accessible, to make it available in the community, there was a low perception of harm around this substance, and that it was pushed to people to start using young. All things that we know are connected to higher substance use rates in a community. But the thing to note is that you do have power as a parent. You are the #1 influence in your kids' lives. So talk to them early and often about this, even when it's hard and even when they are being difficult. And remember that inhaling anything that has not been tested in a research setting contains risk, that nicotine and cannabis both have negative impacts on teen brain and development, that you want to talk often with your kids. Make sure that they know that you don't want them to use drugs and alcohol, and develop a plan for what you'll do if they do. Seek help for them early. And policies in the community matter, and parent voices are needed in that. Like I said, this industry targeted young people. And there's things that we can do as a community, as a state, to help keep that from continuing to happen. So there's a lot of things happening in our legislature, in our communities, and I think we need more voices of parents and families who are being impacted by the way things are now, so that we can help to improve our society as a whole and make it easier for people to make healthy choices around substance use and for kids to thrive in this culture of substance use. So I'll leave here on the screen some resources to get help. Like I said, My Life, My Quit is great, 802 Quits. And there's also Vermont Help Link, which is a way to connect to all sorts of different substance use support, not just for nicotine addiction. And there's also a lot of really great resources to learn and talk more with kids about substance use and about vaping in particular. So we'll leave those on the list as well. Thank you so much for your time, and we wish you the best of luck with supporting your kids around this issue. Now we'll move on to tonight's panel, where folks can ask their questions of these 3 wonderful people that we've brought in today.